Today I'm going to show you how in Photoshop you can take an image that you have and begin the basics of creating artwork, original artwork out of that image based on that image. For this tutorial, you'll either need to download a high quality image, email yourself an image you want to work with, or if you have an iPhone you can actually airdrop it. The first thing you'll need to do after you know what image you're going to use is set up a file on Photoshop for what size you want this to be. For this project, I'm going to make sure I have the Photoshop window clicked, and I'm going to File, New, and we should have a new file screen pop up like this. I'm going to set it up as a custom size here, so I'm going to do this in inches, and let's make it 6 by 6. That's what I'm already set up for. Resolution 200 is a good amount right there, and I'm going to say create. Make sure your numbers match there. Okay, we get this white background, and again, we don't know what we're going to use this for or anything, so I usually like to create a couple of layers by going to Layer, New Layer. Okay. And I'm actually going to create one more because I know I might want one more later. So I'm going to create new layer again. Okay. And then I'm actually going to get rid of that white background. I'm going to unlock it. I'm going to take layer 0 and just trash it there. Now I'm going to go to File, Place Embedded. And I'm going to pick out the photo that I want to use. So because I just actually airdropped my photo, same thing if you downloaded it from your email, the number one place you would look is here in Downloads. And I can see in Downloads, there's my image. I'm choosing a picture of who I think is one of the best basketball players alive today, and that's my little nephew right here. So I'm going to make a drawing out of him. And yeah, look at that. He's got the baller intensity there. It initially places this as large as it could. It's got this big X through it. That means you can still resize it. I'm going to actually hold down Shift, and holding down Shift keeps it in proportion. I'm going to kind of just blow it up a little bit larger because I want it to fill the space a little more. Maybe I went a little too big on that, so I'm going to use Command- to zoom out a little bit and bring that down a little. And right there. Once I have it where I want it, I'm going to press the return key, and it goes there for good. So if you notice, this layer now turned into that image. Now, the most important thing when you're doing this drawing is to make sure you have the proper layer selected. So we created these two layers because this is a background layer, and if I press this eyeball, it goes away. I can also mess with the opacity. That means how much of it I can see. I can fade it out like that. This is what we're using as our guide. So whenever we start drawing or doing any work, we want to work on the layer on top of this layer, and it should be on top. If it's on bottom, you won't be able to see what you're doing. So it should be on top here. On this layer, I brought the opacity down just so I can see my lines a little better when I'm drawing here. And I'm going to select this layer, and then we're going to go over here, and you can use the paintbrush tool or the pencil tool. I'm going to give the pencil tool a go. Now if you select that tool and you look up here, there are some things that you should keep in mind. First is the thickness of your line, and this tells you what size it is. So if we just look over here, you also want to look at what color. So I'm going to go over here, and I've got black selected. That's good. So I'm going to just draw in here. So that's a pretty thin line. I don't know if I want it that thin. I would recommend for what we're doing here, maybe a 3-point line. Let's see how that looks. That's a little bit clearer, harder line. So that's what I'm going to use. So I use the pencil tool, a 3-point line. Now's when your art skills come in. So basically what you're doing with this pencil tool is you're using this as a guide, and you are simply starting out by kind of tracing the major lines you see. And pay attention. See, I didn't really like the line I did there, so you can always grab the eraser, and you can change the size of eraser the same way you change the size of the pen, and you can erase back up. You can also use Command-Z to undo what you just did, or that's edit, step backwards. And then I'm going to go back to my pencil here, and basically you're following the lines and creating a trace. Now, you want to pay attention and make sure that your lines connect so that later we can color this in, and that will be what I show you next. But essentially you're just tracing, and if you do a line that you don't like, you're erasing that. I'm doing some of this off the recording so you don't have to watch every second, but I did want to point out, if during this process you want to zoom in or zoom out, you simply do that by pressing Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. If you get to somewhere where you want a straight line, you can also click down with the pencil, then press Shift, and then just draw across and it'll make a straight line. So that's how I'm making the bottom of the photo here. If you want to check your progress and see what you're doing and how you're doing and turning this photo into like a drawing, you can do this, and you can see like I've clearly forgotten his nose, so I'm going to go back and do that. So you can click that eyeball anytime to see what you're looking like at this point. Now, the artistry comes in what details you choose to add. So, for instance, if you look at things like fabric or hair, you'll notice there are lines in there, even on things like a nose or face. And it's what lines you choose to put on there, what starts looking like too much, what gives it a natural look here. So I'm just kind of doing this, and I'm going to erase any of these that I don't end up liking, but it just kind of shows that this material or fabric has movement to it. Same thing with the hair. You could do, depending on the hair, you could do some lines in there if you think that that helps make it a little more visual. So I might end up erasing some of these, but I'm adding some details and lines that show direction and give a little texture. So sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. It depends on what you like. So you can do that and see. I like the way that's looking. It's also hard to do sometimes, but you can, make sure that don't leave out details. The more details generally, the better. But you can also overdo it, and then you end up with like, too many lines in the drawing, and it's distracting. It starts looking like an old person. So I'm just doing these little details here just to give it a little more realism. You could go really far with this. I mean, you could show where knuckles are. You could do things like that. I generally don't like that, so I'm going to erase that. I'm going to look at where I'm at right now, and I like where this is going. You notice I didn't close the face line all the way, because some of those lines, if you look at them, like, don't be afraid. That's where your artistry comes in, to know what lines to do and what lines to leave alone. But once you have an image kind of like this, I'm probably going to add some lines on this basketball, but I'm not going to do the logo. Then you can move on to deciding, are you going to leave it as a line drawing to go for that style, or are you going to color it in, which is what I'll show you in the next video. But once you have that where you want it, you can always blank that out, and it's like it doesn't exist. And you can go to File, Save As, and make sure that you select the proper place to save it, which would be on the server in your folder. So wherever you keep your folder is where you should keep it. There's my folder, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to name it something, since it says Untitled 1. I'm going to name it Nephew Cutout, or not Cutout, Nephew Drawing. And I'm going to make sure it's saving as a Photoshop, not a JPEG, anything like that, because we want it Photoshop in case we want to change any lines or anything later. So then you press Save, and you say OK, and you'll see the name change, and you should be good to go with the drawing portion.